Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle. I have back with me Daniel Adams, and guys, let me just tell you, I have a feeling that this is going to be just a magnificent episode today because um Daniel and I have been chatting for gall the last 48 hours, kind of back and forth, and even uncovering some of the forgiveness stuff that I am still needing to work on. Thank you, Daniel. Definitely
Sure.
needing it. And I think it's cool, listeners, that, we can all look at the stuff that's going on down deep inside of us and still say, I need to work on that. I still need to work on that. I've made extremely great progress because I really do feel like I have, but I still need to work on that. And so today, I've asked Daniel to come on and speak with us about what is forgiveness and how can we use that forgiveness to take back some really big personal control because, like, if you're anything like me and where I was, starting my healing journey, and sometimes even where I still find myself, we can find ourselves in a lot of blame. And when we are in that blame, it really takes away from our ability to set some fabulous boundaries for ourselves and to really, really step into this forgiveness attitude. Because so many people think that forgiveness is like that whole, if somebody slaps you, just turn the other cheek and let them slap you again. And you never you never kick somebody out of your life, you never set boundaries. Like that's kind of what the world's definition of forgiveness is. But as I've done a deep study of forgiveness, I have found that is like the furthest thing from forgiveness that you can possibly expect. So, Daniel, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. You are just awesome and such a gift. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. And hi, listeners. Good to be with everybody today. I'd love to start today with an invocation, which is a prayer
Mm-hmm.
that every single person listening feels the love of God in a unique way that they never have before.
Oh, I'm excited for this. Let's do
I
this.
pray
I'm
this
excited.
floods like every single one of us, that the love and the mercy and the grace, and also the structure and the power and the joy and the constancy of God will be with all of us, that every single one of us will be edified because we're investing time and energy here in not just this conversation, but in applying the inspiration you get from this conversation. That's my invocation. And I love bringing Jesus into this because I love Jesus. So there are all the pieces of the invocation. Aaron, it's so good to be in your space. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being here. Okay, and thank you for that prayer too, because you know, um, Kyson and I were just talking, a- and I think this is actually going to become the podcast that we're talking about with Kyson is actually next week. So a little bit of foreshadowing there, listeners, but we were talking about, how when you have two people, witnessing in the name of Christ, how he will be there also, and and then bringing in his spirit because we're talking about such a very foundational piece of the atonement, who Jesus is,
Mhm.
what it means to accept our Savior. Like, we are really talking about such a foundational piece here. So, thank you for just, anchoring that in even more. I would love to know, though, like, let's talk about this question. Like, what is forgiveness? What truly does it mean to forgive? And I know you mentioned, a couple of things here. You know, how does it help us take back control?
The yummy question. So, first thing that comes to my heart and my mind, what is forgiveness? It's freedom.
Yeah.
forgiveness is the act of thinking that something outside of me, and I'm talking with my hands here and waving furiously, something outside of me has power to mess with what's inside of me. And forgiveness is the act of coming back home and saying, nothing that is happening outside of me is affecting what's going on inside of me, because I am whole and complete and sovereign, and I'm a vessel for God. And I experience sadness, and that's fine. And I can be with that. I have the capacity for that. I can experience anger. That's fine. I have the capacity to be with that. I can experience fear and terror, and that's fine. I have the capacity to be with that. I can experience massive amounts of joy. I have the capacity for that. Forgiveness for me is freedom to know that like nothing outside of me can mess with what's going on inside of me. So in some ways, I feel like forgiveness is a way of life. Forgiveness is a decision. Forgiveness is a practice. People talk about yoga practice, where like over 12 years, you like bend yourself and maybe you see progress and maybe you don't. But it's a practice. You come back every day, right? Like lawyers are in practice. Therapists have practices.
Yes.
Doctors have practices. Like you see 40,000 people and somewhere along the way you help some people.
Well, we've all had some sort of practice, in our lives. I mean, what do you think homework is, right? I mean, we've all dealt with homework in our lives, and I'm coming at this from a teacher perspective as well, because my education, like I do have a background in psychology and a lot of the mental work. You have to actually when you're going through and getting an education degree. You have a lot of the same classes, but gosh, and I gotta think about what I was saying here, but the idea of, having to practice every single day, like practice your multiplication tables, practice division, practice. It is the thing that gets us into the automaticity, and what automaticity is, to you listeners who don't know, it's basically like when you're in that learning curve and you're like struggling a little bit with the learning piece of this, but eventually it becomes an automatic thing, kind of like driving. If you think
Like it
about,
becomes
like, yeah,
habitual. Like you
it
just
does.
brush your teeth at night because you do. Like you don't think about it. You don't concentrate on it. You don't, unless you're doing it with your other hand.
Yeah, exactly. Or like if you consider, like I said, when you first start driving, I mean, the first time I went
Right.
driving, I drove off a 20-foot cliff, and I'm not even kidding.
I'm glad you're still around.
Yeah, I am too. I am too. The car, not so much, but I'm good. And, now, like, I drive everywhere, right? And I can be like in a conversation with someone, or I can be listening to a podcast, and I can actually multitask without really thinking too much about the driving. You know what I mean? Because it's just an automatic thing. The same thing with like riding a bicycle, but it comes through daily practice. And when trauma comes up, like driving off that cliff, you can't stop. You've got to practice a bit more.
It would be sad if you had never driven again, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Ensure boundaries. And, to be clear, like we, you know, there's a lot of talk of trauma in your circle and in your coaching work and many of the clients that you serve. At the core, trauma is this thing that happens that shouldn't have happened. And that's at the core of what trauma is, right? My body violently rejects whatever it was that it experienced because it shouldn't have happened that way from that person or that car or that time. I wasn't ready. Whatever mixture of that is trauma. And forgiveness is not condoning actions that shouldn't have happened, but it's letting go of the fight with reality that it did happen.
Yeah. You know, I love that piece here too, because, as I've been studying trauma, and I'm talking about like, making myself first and foremost probably the guinea pig. Because, the reason I coach is because I've done a lot of these practices on myself, and it's the same thing with you, Daniel. I mean, the reason why you're so successful in your practice as well is because you've made yourself the guinea pig first, you know? And so looking back, I can honestly say that like 98% of my trauma was self-influenced and self-induced.
And it's not that you wake up in the morning, you're like, you
No.
know what I want to experience today? I'm gonna have some heavy trauma today. Man, I just cannot wait for
Yeah.
3 p.m. today. Like nobody's doing
No.
that. Do not
No.
misunderstand what we're
No.
saying.
No, absolutely not. And there's no shame about that because it's something I personally experienced too. But the blame. Holy crap. When I'm sitting there like, oh, he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have been looking at porn. He shouldn't, and or like he shouldn't be spending money that we don't have, and he shouldn't be like not talking to me. He shouldn't, or she shouldn't. Like the more I spend time and energy into that sphere, the more trauma I create for myself because I'm like super hyper focused on the bad thing. And that's going to create more of a bad energy. And that bad energy is going to create bad emotions, which create bad actions, which create bad results, right? Or not the results that we want. And it's this piece that I talk about, like it's like ripping the knife handle, not the knife handle, but the knife blade. And the more trauma we get, or the more we think about it, we grip that blade even harder and harder and harder, wondering why we're in so much pain and why our hand is bleeding. And the forgiveness piece of this is letting that go.
The fact that it happened, the fact that you're
Yeah,
holding a
that
knife.
affected. Yeah, yeah.
You're not ignoring the fact that you're bleeding.
No.
You're not ignoring the fact that you're holding a knife. All of that is reality.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's arguing that. Nobody's arguing that your bishop should not have touched you in that way. Nobody's arguing that your spouse shouldn't have cheated. Nobody's arguing that the person that
Yeah.
hit you head on drunk at 65 miles an hour should not have been drinking, should not have been behind the wheel, on and on and on, that whoever was driving the car should have seen him. Like all of that is true.
Yeah,
All of
that is
that is
true.
reality. What happened,
Mm-hmm.
happened. I
Yeah.
wish we could change it and somehow escape the pain of all of that. Forgiveness for me is the freedom of simply admitting I'm holding the knife
Yeah,
and
exactly.
continue to hold the knife. And it's like, whoa, sorry,
Well,
buddy. I think I'm going to set this knife down and let's address that we're spurting blood all over the place.
yeah, totally. Like we're bleeding out here, right? And addressing the fact that you are bleeding,
Right.
and not that somebody else made you hold the knife or something like that. Just simply first and foremost saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm bleeding.
Right.
And I'm bleeding bad. I need some help." You know, or stitches or band-aids or whatever it
Right.
takes, you know? And I feel like, and you've heard me say this, Daniel, that like one of the greatest things, like one of the greatest words ever created is actually forgiveness because like the definition is right in the word. It is for the giving. Because seriously, here you are, you're holding that knife and you're gripping that knife handle desperately bad. When you finally let that go, the knife, and you can address the bleeding, you're giving that knife up,
And
right?
there's all these
So,
other possibilities of what
yeah.
you can do with your hand.
Mm-hmm. First, let it heal,
Right.
right? Right? Don't go find another knife to grab, but like, definitely let that heal. And then what are the possibilities? So I want to talk to you about this. This was actually a big piece, like a giant aha as I've studied forgiveness, and this is actually a topic that the Lord has specifically instructed that I learn and study and put into practice. But I got thinking about, the idea that forgiveness is taking that piece that is so painful and giving it up, like giving it to Christ, right? But what he says is so profound and so powerful. And it's this idea that he he talks about, and I'd have to look where in the scriptures it says this so I could actually like find the exact wording. But he talks about like how he came into the world to take upon himself the sin of man, right? That he would take a look at these sins and claim them as his own. So that means that if that's true, that would mean that my husband's sins, my sins, your sins, my kids' sins, my neighbor's sins, like all
Mhm.
of them, the listener's sins, well, if he's claimed them as his own, then who are we really forgiving?
Right.
You know, that's a powerful question. And that begs the question again, like, what is forgiveness? And why? Why? Because, am I really seriously forgiving my husband? Am I forgiving my neighbor whose dog comes over and poops in my yard? Am I forgiving my colleague who totally tanked a job that I had? Am I
Yeah.
forgiving? Who am I forgiving?
And me. Am I
Yeah.
forgiving me for staying in the relationship? Am I forgiving me for relating in whatever pattern I've been relating in?
Mm-hmm.
Am I forgiving God for a plan wherein we're on the planet and things hurt sometimes?
Yeah.
Like, I've had so many candid conversations with people who are just like, I've never told anybody at this, but I am so freaking pissed at God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what the
I've
hell
had
were
that
you
too.
thinking? And it's like, literally, like, what manner of hell were you concocting to where we get to come on this planet and hurt? Make it stop hurting, right? That's where most people
Yes, I've been there. I've been there.
are coming from, going like, this hurts. I don't have the capacity to be with this level of pain. Somebody make it stop. God, why did you not make it stop? Right. And here's
Yeah.
another space for forgiveness to say, at some level, I'm screaming, well, I shouldn't be hurting. And the truth is, like, well, I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I could argue with that all day. But the
Mm-hmm.
act of forgiveness is the freedom to say, I'm experiencing pain and it feels like more than I can handle. Ouch.
Yeah.
Somebody turn this off. I've been in
Well,
the sauna too long. I've been in the
yeah.
cold plunge too long. I've been in this financial pinch too long.
Or I've been misunderstood too long. I've been overlooked too long. I have been the black, and that's what I would think to myself, You put me in a family that totally does not understand me. Why in the
Hmm.
heck would you do that to me, right?
Right.
You put me with a spouse that does not understand me, that can never understand me. Why would you do that to me? And so we tend to kind of blame God and we get angry at God. But, I mean, those of you that have listened to my story know that there's that moment in time where I literally had like my Enos wrestle with God where I screamed at him. I'm not even joking. I swore at him. I cursed him to the skies. I did all kinds of things.
How did he show up?
He was so gentle and so loving. And I screamed at him more. you know, I literally got into a point where I just like melted into this puddle of oblivion and tears and some form of human. And that's when, after I'd finally like exploded, like volcano erupted, you know, that's when I finally had the capacity to hear, give me your will, and that's where it will be. That's we'll get you there. And I figured to myself, well, that's one thing I haven't done yet. I obviously hadn't because I was miserable, right? But doing that worked wonders. It worked well. It worked wonders. And you know, you and I have been talking a little bit, and so you know the situation, but I'm doing that same process again, learning how to step into even more trust and more truth and more abundance because I want to experience another level of something different now. And
Yeah.
what a beautiful opportunity now for me to, like, I don't have all of that anger to God built up anymore. But like what another beautiful opportunity to make him my partner.
Right.
Like to step into a partnership. Like, and so like talking about this whole other piece of forgiveness that we're now taking like these pieces that need healing again and forgiving that. Like I'm actually forgiving the anger. I'm forgiving the blame, the I'm forgiving myself actually on it, I think on a very deeper level because whenever we're ready to heal, that means that a new version of ourselves has to be born.
Totally. That's where it gets fun.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so yummy. You know, but the growing process, like, kind of stinks a little. But without that growing process, like the forgiveness, if you're giving something up that doesn't fit anymore, that doesn't serve anymore, that does not resonate with this new version of you, he is going to put something inside that's going to feel a little bit like a stretch. It's going to feel a little bit like it's a bit scary, like a little bit unnerving, I think, at some points. But what would happen if we leaned into it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's unknown, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, lots of directions we could go. One thing I want to speak to also is like fundamental to the forgiveness conversation is, do I feel like life is doing me? Do I feel like life is happening to me? Or do I feel like I have agency? Do I feel
That's
like
a
I have a
yummy
choice? Do
question.
I feel like I am an agent to where life is happening for me or through me? Or I get to create what happens next?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what life isn't that black and white, but in most scenarios, it's worth looking at, do I feel
Mm-hmm.
like a victim here? Do I feel like life is doing me? Do I feel like life is happening to me? Do I feel like I'm backed into a corner and I have these super crummy circumstances that I have no influence or control over? And I'm going to blame everything under the sun for all this pain that I'm experiencing that I don't want to experience? Or am I an agent? Am
Mm-hmm.
I truly free to create what happens next? And I feel like forgiveness is the mechanism to cross the bridge from a victim consciousness into a creator consciousness.
Yes. Yes.
And none of those are bad.
No.
They have predictable fruits. If I stay in victim energy, I know what's going to happen. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to be broke. I'm going to be miserable. I'm going to
Yeah.
push people away. I'm
Yep.
going to be angry and stressed and worried most of the time. And listen closely, none of those are bad.
No.
They're just experiences.
Mm-hmm.
and they shine a contrast to what it feels like to be in full and complete accountability.
Yeah.
It shows a contrast for what it's like to be creating and be excited about it,
Yeah.
where life is happening through me, where life is happening for me.
Well, see, I'll tell you something. Like, there was a piece in my healing journey where the Lord kind of made me think for a second. He says, is it possible that you could actually be grateful for this? Could you actually be grateful for the debt? Could you be grateful for the crummy financial circumstances? Could you be grateful for the trauma, the betrayal, the hurt, the people turning their back on you?
Yeah.
Like could you actually be grateful for that? And whoa, that actually brought up a whole other level of like pain, strangely enough, considering that. But
Right.
what are the possibilities if we were actually could possibly be grateful for some of these things? What would we have to shift in our mind now? Because I can tell you, um, I on the other side of uh, you know, the betrayal at this point, I am 110% thankful for my husband's addiction. I'm 110% thankful that my mom was abusive as a kid. And I still love this woman and I have a like better than I've ever had kind of a relationship with her and can actually, I feel like truly honor her now because I'm grateful for the way she showed up. Had they not, this podcast wouldn't be here. My coaching business would not be here. My clients would not be where they're at because of the coaching I have given them. I wouldn't be talking with you. I wouldn't be talking with my other friends, Kushla and Kaisen, and all of these other people now that actually, oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. But all these other people that have now stepped into my sphere to support me,
Mhm.
that wouldn't have been part of my story. Not saying that my story still wouldn't be awesome,
Right.
but I wouldn't have needed to find that healing journey, and that journey is worth telling. What a beautiful experience now. Like, holy crap, I'm so glad I went through it and came out the other side.
Right. And like, is there big emotion in there? You bet. Are there
Oh,
uncomfortable
yeah.
conversations with mom and husband? 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Are you capable of having all of them?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Do you know you're
Yes.
capable until you have them?
Yeah. Well, and let's talk about like what emotion that brings up. I mean, this is something you are like a master of, and this is something I love so much about like working with you is, you know, um, when we're talking in the creator community, by the way, listeners, go check that out. I will link that in the description below.
Thank you.
But you're welcome. It's awesome. Um, check into where that feels, like where you're feeling that in your body, right?
Mm.
Where's that anxiety? Like does it feel like, oh, this is so relaxing, or does it feel like you got punched in the gut a little bit, Possibly considering that there is an element of fear to this. Because I know, like, for me, like, when I was considering, like, those tough conversations I had to have with my mom and my husband and myself, like, there was some tough conversations that
And
definitely had
God.
to have
Yeah.
there. Yeah, and God, right? It was a little terrifying at some points. But now I work through traumas and I work through stuff a lot quicker because I've learned some very valuable lessons. I'm not as scared of the conversations anymore because they've just kind of become second nature. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like, what beautiful skills to learn, and is it possible? Like, here is like it, oh, this is yummy. This is so good. Okay. If we actually forgive this, give this up to God, lean into what we need to lean into, is it possible? Is it just possibly possible that within that doing and leaning into and trusting and accepting, is it possible you might actually find your mission and purpose in that? Why you're actually here? Why you personally, the you that stepped up on, God's doorstep and said, "Here I am, send me," when your mission and purpose was called out, would you actually possibly detect that? I did.
Yeah, it's a powerful question, right? Like, do I
Yeah.
believe the scripture or do I not? Where it says all things shall work together for their good. Like all
Mm-hmm.
things? Like even the painful things?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Elizabeth
if I
Smith.
spend my entire like Buddha's whole thing that, influenced millions of people was like suffering exists. We're all trying to make sure we never suffer, and that creates more suffering. So stop
Mm-hmm.
doing that. Right. And like
Mm-hmm.
Buddha brought this whole other level of Jesus's words from a different perspective that very much point to the same thing. That's like this
Mm-hmm.
internal freedom and this sense of, yeah, purpose, like
Yeah.
you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, and I think you've experienced that too. Like I've heard a little bit about your story and stuff, but I think like the reason why you have stepped into your mission and purpose so powerfully is because you accepted the lesson, you know? And it's kind of like I've explained before to clients, why do we have hunger and thirst, right? Sometimes, I don't know about you, but I've been really hungry before, really hungry. And it's there to get our attention that we need some sort of nourishment.
It's a message. Yeah.
It's a message. It's simply just a message, right? So is it possible that this is a type of hunger and thirst? Like, I love how Christ talks about this, like hunger and thirst after righteousness. Well, they get our attention. What is it that's getting our attention to align our thoughts, align our feet, align our journey with Him?
Yes.
That's a yummy question, because think about like where that's going to go eventually. What's going to come from that? Where could you possibly be? And like I want to speak to this for just a second because I'm just kind of checking in with my listeners, and there's totally the possibility that somebody could be like hearing this and saying, but I don't want to accept that I have to live this. I don't want to accept that I have to be the victim. I don't want to accept that my husband is going to deal with porn for the rest of his life, and I just have to deal with that. And I have to be there, and I have to, like, I don't want to accept the suck anymore. You know what I mean? Daniel and I have already said that you don't have to, right? That is not a piece of that. You know, Forgiveness is, I feel like, accepting joy.
Hmm.
If you are so busy focusing on the pain, and we're coming around again, kind of hitting this again full circle, but if you are so busy accepting the pain and focusing on the pain, your way out of it is going to become very, very muddied. And so, another great question. that the Lord asked me in my healing journey was, Erin, what are you focusing on? You asked me this yesterday, by and I was like, oh, dang it,
It's
caught,
such a relevant
It's
question.
such a relevant question. Like, what are you really focusing on? And I was like, well, my husband's addiction, my mom's like unacceptance of me, the fact I don't feel loved, my colleagues' betrayal, my neighbor's betrayal, my kids, blah blah, like all the negative. It
Right.
was
I
a
wish I
lot of
had more
negative focus.
money.
Yeah, I wish I had more money. I wish I had more influence. I wish, I wish, I wish. So a lot of really negative focus. The second question he asked me was, okay, what's your return on your investment? And I was like, there's not one.
Well, I mean, like, wouldn't it be rad to start adding it up? Like, here's how many hours I spent fighting with mom. Here's how many
Yeah.
hours I spent worried about whether spouse is going to use porn or cheat again or not. Here's
Mhm.
how many hours, I'm putting into like freaking out about what our bank account balance says.
Mhm.
Like,
Or
if
how
we could
many
measure
hours?
that, it might be stunning.
Yeah, or how many hours am I like thinking about my husband's addiction or his actions or my
Right.
teenager or blah 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 blah. What's the return on your investment?
Right.
What is
Low.
the return? Or negative,
Low to
right?
negative, right?
Right? Totally not where we want it to be. And so what would happen? The next question, what would happen if you took back all of that time, all of your talents, all of your focus, all of your energy, and instead put it into creating a relationship with me and yourself?
Right. What would happen if you took 30% of all that energy and put it into
Yeah.
serving somebody or creating
Yeah.
value in the marketplace or deciding making a relational vision and enrolling
Mhm.
your partner into it? What would
Yeah.
it, you know what I mean? I love
Mhm.
what you said. Yeah. What would it look like to put that time into meditation? What would it look
Yeah.
to put that time
What is it?
into developing new skills?
Getting clear.
Right.
Yeah, and and this is again something you and I were just talking about, is this idea of like uh, I think that sometimes we're afraid of like taking that off because we don't know what it would look like to gain a relationship with ourselves or to gain a relationship with God or to actually put our time and effort there. Like we know what the investment will be. Like that's obvious, right? Like for every 10% we put in, we get 90 back. There's a little bit of a tithing scenario there for you, right? But we can also say that if we just took like even like you said even 30% of that back, like and put it into getting clear.
Yeah. Reallocate it into getting clear.
Yeah, just like there's a first step right there. Because as I started thinking about who I would be without trauma chaining me to a wall, oh wow, that's a vision. That's a new thing.
Right.
And you know what? I can honestly say I've stepped into that person now. That is exactly who I am now. I caught the vision. And I got to thinking like how would that person think? How would that person react? What would their actions be? What would their reactions be? What did they think? What was it that was their building blocks? And I'm doing that again. I truly am doing that again. And listeners, like I said, there's no shame in this because we're all up leveling at some degree. I'm still walking around the planet in a skin suit. Daniel's still walking around the planet in a skin suit. Obviously, we don't have everything figured out yet.
Not even close.
Not even close. But Isn't it
If we
awesome?
did, another thing in life would bring us new growth opportunities.
Yes, and that stretch. Like like let's just get some stretch marks on ourselves, like,
Right.
tiger stripes. Here we go. But we can do one of two things. We can accept the growth, and with that growth, there's a very good chance it's going to come with a little bit of discomfort, you know? I mean, I remember being a kid and having growing pains that were a bit uncomfortable, you know?
Right.
Growing spiritually, mentally, emotionally, even physically right now. I mean, I've got some other goals physically, and there's definitely some growing pains in my physical body to some degree.
Yeah.
Growing pains are a piece of this, but are we willing to consider that the growing pain might be far less intense than the pain of grasping that knife?
Right. The pain of resistance.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is resistance to the government. This is resistance to, whatever medical craziness is going on. This is resistance to whatever my spouse does or doesn't do. This is resistance to whatever path my child chooses to walk, whether, that ends them
Mhm,
in prison or not. This is resistance to how my body looks and feels.
mhm,
This is resistance to what's in front of me. This
mhm.
is resistance to what patterns are showing up in my relationship. Like, if I can let go of that knife, if I can let go of that resistance, that's where life starts.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's where we start creating more than we're taking.
And
I've
that is
got
a fabulous boundary, by the way, guys, that Daniel so blessedly reminded me of yesterday was, are you creating more than you're consuming? And if you're over here like I said, giving all this energy to the problem, you're definitely consuming more than you're creating, because it's hard to consider what could you create if you're so focused on this, right? But taking, like I said, some of that energy back and giving it into what are the possibilities instead. Whoa, that's huge.
the powerful way to live for sure. It's a
It is.
free way to live, and it'd be good for me to wrap here. Final thoughts. Like, I'm grateful for the discussion around forgiveness. I'm
Mm-hmm.
grateful for the openness, and happy to share more of my story too. Tina and I, the first 11 years of our marriage, averaged $29,600 a year between us.
Ooh,
It's hard to run a family on $29,000 a year.
I'm surprised you did.
Right. We ran a tight ship and lived with a bunch of family for a while, and lived in a bunch of dumpy holes that were $700 a month for a while. And, inflation has changed things. I spent so much time blaming her and waiting for her, and I spent so much time mad at God, and I spent very little time developing useful skills that people in the marketplace valued.
Mm-hmm.
I was all about me for 11
Mm-hmm.
years. I was all about how novel my career was and how novel my cool thing was, and how come everybody isn't buying this really cool thing that I'm offering? I'm like, well, is it adding value to them? Well, yeah, they should pay me and then they'll see how much value I can add. It's like, no, 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 Daniel, you're missing the point. If I solve six-figure problems, it creates six figures. Like,
Six
it's
figure
it
incomes.
creates six-figure income. If I solve
Mm-hmm.
seven-figure problems, it creates seven-figure income. If I
There you
solve
go.
eight-figure problems, it creates eight-figure income. And it can be stupid problems, right? Coca-Cola makes a lot of money and sells a lot of poison. Zero people benefit by drinking more Coca-Cola,
I agree.
but they're adding value at some level,
Mm-hmm.
quenching thirst, or, making you think of Santa Claus or polar bears or your grandma, or however they've linked that emotionally.
Or Mentos for me. I think of Mentos.
Yeah. or keeping Fizz in business or whatever. And nothing against Coca-Cola. Like, I don't care. It's just like, if you help more people get what they want, it creates energy, it creates exchange. And that could be money, that could be referrals, that could be time. Right? The sooner I get into accountability, the sooner I get into forgiveness of myself. Daniel, why have you allowed yourself to make $29,000 a year and pretend like you're leading your family? That was a painful conversation. God, why haven't you given me a job opportunity? He's like, how come you haven't created one? How come you haven't developed marketable skills? Would you like any number of these 17 paths to go to have a useful skill? Right? Forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And this
Forgiveness.
is when things started to shift for us. When I let go of the knife, when I stopped blaming my partner and stopped blaming God and stopped blaming the marketplace that they didn't want to buy my super cool thing. How come no one will employ me? Like, well, awesome. What's in it for them? So many people are like, I don't understand marketing. I need to get better at marketing. And it's like, you need to figure out what people want and then give it to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's as simple as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people want sugar in a cup for $7 at Fizz. So if you can give that to them, awesome.
And then the headaches that come off of that, they also like the drug companies produce like profit off of that, right?
Right. So like, develop a skill, get in forgiveness, go offer your genius to the world and help people get what they want. And if it can be something that is creating more than it's taking, even better.
Yes.
These are my final thoughts. Curious how you'd love to wrap today.
So I I personally like I took that very personally, listeners, but you know what? I needed it. I totally needed it because I do feel like there's pieces of this that I have totally figured out. Like there's so many people out there that are hurting
Right.
just like you. Is it possible that the reason why you're hurting is because you're called to soothe? And how? Like,
And it may be as simple as being
yeah,
honest. Like, the more of us
yeah,
talk honestly about our experience, the more it's like,
yeah.
oh, you miscarried? I did too 4 times and it sucked every time.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a friend who had two stillborn babies. I mean,
Brutal.
it's totally brutal. And you know
Talk
what?
about pain.
She's got the most fantastic mindset around the whole thing. And so
Yeah.
she's stepping into coaching. Do you feel like
Right.
there's a niche for that? Oh, you betcha.
It's like, the more we share our experience,
Mm-hmm.
honestly, not to gain attention, not to gain fame, but just simply like, here's what I experienced. What have you experienced? Right. If I can
And
listen with curiosity, like, it completely changes the planet.
yeah, and show people where the bridge is.
Right.
Like, okay, if you heal, you've got a powerful story. Show people where the bridge is. There's
Yes.
no bridge, ferry people across the river. I mean, there's that story, about the talents and the guy that ferried people across the river to get them to the new valley way faster. That's kind of a bit of a point here. But for me to wrap up, listeners, I really want to drive home this point to you that forgiveness, if we were really to say what is forgiveness, forgiveness is a complete and utter acceptance of the atonement of Jesus Christ, realizing that the justice has already been paid for, that you do not need to focus on the justice. Focusing on that justice is the one thing that's going to keep you deeper and further into your trauma. He's already paid for it. He's already done it. He's already taken care of the justice. So, and can you trust God that He can teach people better than what you can? That He can be a parent, that He can deliver justice in the right timing in a way that's way better than anything you can conjure. And if you can trust that, do you all of a sudden feel that freedom? Like Daniel was talking about? It's freedom. And now, what can you go create with that? Forgiveness is freeing up the space for you to step into being a creator. It is not you like having to accept more abuse or hardship or
Create a different situation for
anger.
yourself by
Yeah.
all means. Like
Yeah.
if boundaries are not respected, like relate in a different way, maybe with
Mhm.
space in between you, maybe in a different relationship. Like
Mhm. And
God will
maybe,
guide you.
and it's okay too for relationships to come in and out of your life. It is okay
Right.
to accept that. The only relationship you will never have freedom from is a relationship with yourself. And so if you truly, truly want healing, start there.
The only place I can make change.
Only place.
Because I try and control the hell out of my partner and it never works. She's so freaking stubborn.
Was that possibly meant
No, that was meant for me. Changes I can only make change in myself. That's it.
That's
It's
right.
the only place.
You're right. Totally right.
Listeners, super love you. Pray you felt the love of God today in a way you never have.
And thank you so much, Daniel, for being here, showing up like you always do, and just adding value as you always do. I really do appreciate you. So,
100%. Be well, everybody.
okay. Thanks so much, everyone. We will see you in the next episode. Bye.